Something most of us learn as children, but then often forget as an adult, is that words really matter. The words that we choose when interacting with someone have a huge impact on the interaction itself. And I think what happens as an adult, particularly in places like sales, is we tend so much to we tend to focus so much on sort of what we want someone to know that yes, we focus on words, but we focus on words in terms of their sort of content of ideas, right? What are the ideas that we're trying to convey? We want you to know this or know this about our company, know this about our value, know this about our competitors, or know this about some other company that's seen value from our solution. But we tend to not overlook, but just tend to forget sort of that words also have a huge impact, not just on what we want someone to know, but what we want someone to feel. While this may seem self-evident, I suppose, and maybe even sort of silly to talk about, because after all, we all are adults, how many of us spend nearly as much time thinking very carefully about the feelings we're trying to generate with the words that we convey, and not just the knowledge that we're trying to generate with the words that we convey? And I've been reminded of this across the last couple of weeks as we've been running frame-making workshops with clients around the country and ultimately around the world. And we focus a lot of those early stage frame-making workshops on something called the phrase that frames. In the book, we originally called it the phrase that pays. If you've read the book, then you've probably seen it there called the phrase that pays. We've rethought it, rebranded it, I suppose, and we now think of it as the phrase that frames. And the phrase that frames at a high level sounds something a little bit like, in working with other companies like you, one of the things that we've been surprised to learn is, and the idea is not so much that you say those words per se, but those words really capture more of a posture, a set of feelings and emotions that you're trying to create in the customer such that you're solving not for their confidence in you, but their confidence in themselves. And we break apart the phrase that frames into component elements, things like social proof and prompting and bounding and empathy, and sort of this co-learning posture and collaborativeness. And all of that can be packed into this phrase or the words that follow that phrase simply by choosing very specific words. And as we then work with clients and sellers around sort of, okay, what is the advice, the coaching you want to convey to your customer such that they feel more confident in themselves and their ability to navigate a purchase, we spend just as much time not just on the content of the words, but the actual words themselves and how you convey those, how you use those words to convey and generate certain emotions in your customer. Just last week in South Carolina, working with a team, someone was working with the phrase that frames and saying, one of the things we've learned, this can be really hard. And I said, and I stopped him, hopefully very diplomatically, said, try this, try and say that again, but just say the word really twice. And he said this, he said, working with other customers like you, one of the things we've learned is this can be really, really hard. And the whole room stopped. And they looked at him and they looked at me and they looked back at him and they looked at me and said, what did you just do? And I said, I didn't do anything. I said, but why did that sound so different? I said, right. It's like just by saying the word really twice, it sounded different. It sounded more emotional. It sounded more empathetic. And I'm not suggesting the answer here is like, you should say adjectives or in this case, adverbs, I suppose, twice. It's more like we can actually convey emotion and feeling with the words we use and the way we use those words. And I think this is just an overlooked skill in sales that is critically important in frame making, because in frame making, we're solving not so much for what customers know, but what customers feel. And when you solve for that, it opens up this entirely new toolbox to you as a seller that's been there all along since your very childhood in ways that we've never fully perhaps thought about or developed, is how can we use language to convey and to create feelings and emotions. And if that sounds wild, it actually is, or even sort of off topic to sales, it turns out it's critically important, because if we can't help our customers feel a sort of an emotional connection to the story we're sharing, and then sort of confidence in their ability to navigate their purchase process, then their knowledge of our value or their knowledge of our product won't matter. At the end of the day, the thing that's going to get that deal moving forward is not sort of their knowledge, it's their belief. It's their belief in their ability to make that decision happen, to make a good choice, the belief that they've asked the right questions, they've done enough research, they've thoroughly explored alternatives. And those are things, those are feelings we can generate with the words that we choose. So as you think about how you're engaging your customers, ask yourself, as much time as we're spending on thinking about what we want our customers to know, have we spent equal, if not more time on what we want our customers to feel? And then have we carefully thought about and then practiced and rehearsed the language, the tone, the intonation, the body language that we want to use to convey and to generate that emotion in our customers? It turns out that this is one of the huge highlights of the Framemaking workshops, because it's not something most of us ever talked about in sales, at least not recently. And yet we know from data that it's critically important. Food for thought.